My name is Thea, I'm 38, and I'm standing in my kitchen at 6:47 in the morning, holding a piece of mail that was not meant for me to see. Scott had already left. He's always out before I'm dressed, that part I stopped questioning years ago. The envelope had been tucked between the electric bill and a Bed Bath & Beyond mailer that had somehow survived into this decade. It was from a bank I had never heard of. And Scott's name was on it. Only his name. I set my coffee down. I read the return address again. Then I looked at the account balance printed on the fold of the statement. $214,400. I stood very still. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car backed out of someone's driveway. I didn't move for a long time. She had no idea what I was already about to find. Before I take you back to where this started, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to 6 years before this moment. 6 years earlier, I was 32 and we had been married for 3 years. I worked as a title examiner at a real estate firm called Holcomb & Price on the 4th floor of a building that smelled permanently of recycled air and printer toner. I had a window but it faced the parking garage across the street. I could tell you the exact time of day by which cars were gone from which spots. That's how I passed the minutes when a deed search stalled out. The Subaru in spot 14 left by 8:15, the pickup in spot 31 never moved before noon. I knew that garage better than I knew my own neighborhood. My routine was, up at 5:50, out by 6:35, coffee from the cart on the corner of Delancey, same order every day, medium drip, no sugar. I ate the same lunch 4 days out of 5, a turkey sandwich and an apple, at my desk. I had 3 blazers that I rotated, one of which had a small tear along the lining of the left sleeve that I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. I'm telling you these things because I want you to understand who I was. I was not careless. I was not inattentive. I was a woman who noticed everything. I was a woman who read the fine print for a living. And still, it took me 6 years to find the envelope. Scott and I had met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. He was tall, easy in a room. The kind of man who makes a waiter feel comfortable, and a table feel like it belongs to him. He was a regional sales manager for a medical supply distributor. He made $94,000 a year when we met. I made $61,000. Neither of us was rich. That was fine. When we got married, we agreed to combine finances. Joint checking, joint savings, both names on the mortgage we took out in the second year. I handled the household accounts, not because he asked me to, but because I was better at it and we both knew it. I paid the bills. I tracked the budget. I filed the taxes. He reviewed whatever I put in front of him and signed where I pointed. That trust felt like love. I want to be clear about that. At the time, it felt like he trusted me completely. And I trusted him completely back. He was a good husband for the first 2 years. Maybe longer, if I'm being honest. He was present. He remembered things. He came to my mother's retirement dinner and stayed the whole night and did not check his phone once. He drove my sister to the emergency room at 2 a.m. when I was out of state for work and she couldn't reach her husband. She told me later he'd stayed 4 hours in that waiting room, plastic chair, fluorescent lights, vending machine coffee he didn't touch, until the doctor came out and said she was stable. He didn't call me until he knew. He didn't want me to spend the night panicking across 3 time zones for nothing. That was the kind of man he was, or could be. I have never been able to completely separate those 2 things. He fixed my laptop fan at midnight, hunched over the dining room table with a screwdriver kit he'd ordered specifically for that purpose. He used to make me coffee on Saturday mornings and leave it on the nightstand before I woke up, not every Saturday. But enough that I remembered it. I'm telling you this because none of what comes next makes sense without knowing that there was something real there first, or something that felt real. I'm still not sure which it was. I was introduced to Margot at a networking event in the spring of year 3 of our marriage. She was a senior paralegal at Garrison and, Wells on the 8th floor of my building, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the handshake of someone who has been underestimated so many times that the grip had become reflexive. We didn't become close right away. We rode the elevator together. We nodded in the lobby. Once we shared an umbrella when the parking garage awning was leaking and we were both waiting out a rain. She was not warm in the way that invites you in quickly. She was precise, deliberate, but when she said something, she meant it exactly the way she said it. I liked that about her from the beginning. The first sign that something was wrong came in month 14 of year 3. We were doing our quarterly budget check, my routine, my spreadsheet, and Scott was sitting next to me at the kitchen table, scrolling his phone, nominally present. I flagged that our savings rate had dropped. We've been putting away $1,200 a month into a joint account. That month, only $700 had transferred. I asked him about it. He said he'd had a car repair, something with the exhaust system. He mentioned the number $530, he said, and I nodded and wrote it down and thought nothing else of it, except, I paid our car insurance. I handled all of that. And I had never seen a repair charge come through any of our linked accounts. I thought, maybe he paid cash. I let it go. That was the first time. There would be 41 more. I want to tell you something about how betrayal actually works, not the way it looks in movies where there's a moment of discovery and everything explodes at once. In real life, it's a slow accumulation of things that don't quite add up, each one small enough that you file it away and go back to your turkey sandwich and your parking garage view. That's what happened to me. For 6 years. Let me walk you through some of it. Month 21 of our marriage. I'm reviewing the tax return before Scott signs it. Our total income that year, $168,400 combined. I'm cross-referencing with the W-2 South. His W-2 shows $94,800, consistent with the raise he'd mentioned in the spring. Fine. I file. We get a small refund. Life continues. Month 28. He switches to a new cell phone plan, supposedly to save money. He handles it himself, which he almost never does. When the first bill comes, it's in his name only, not our household account. I mention it. He says he got a deal through work that required a personal plan. I nod. I write down, cell plan, personal. Why? I had a small notebook. Yellow soft cover, the kind you find in a drugstore bin. I kept it in my tote bag. I wasn't building a case yet. I was just writing things down. That was all. A habit from work. Title examiners write everything down. Month 34. We're at dinner with our friends Paul and Lindsay, our oldest married friends, the couple you always end up at the table with. Paul makes an offhand comment about the great deal Scott got on some tickets to a basketball game. A suite. Floor seats, practically. Lindsay is laughing, I'm smiling. And I'm thinking, he didn't mention basketball tickets. He didn't mention a suite. In the car on the way home I say, casually, those tickets sounded fun. When did you go? He tells me it was last month, a work thing, client entertaining. He'd mentioned it, he said. Probably when I was distracted with the Harmon closing. I nod. Maybe I missed it, but I checked my calendar. I have a record of everything. The Harmon closing had been 6 weeks before those tickets, not last month. He hadn't mentioned them at all. I wrote, basketball suite, did not tell me, date discrepancy. Month 41. This is the one that changed the quality of my watching. I was at my desk at Holcomb and Price, running a title search on a property in the Westmere district. Standard stuff, chain of title going back 40 years. Something flagged in the tax lien records. A name caught my eye. A lender I didn't recognize called Talbert Savings Group. I googled it out of habit. And in the search results, buried 3 pages in, was a small news item from 18 months before. A regional financial newsletter noting that Talbert Savings Group had launched an online-only savings product, marketed toward independent earners and commission-based professionals. High yield. FDIC insured. Minimal reporting requirements. I sat very still. Then I opened a new tab and went back to work. I did not say anything to Scott, not that night, not that week. But I wrote it down. Month 44. I run into Margot at the coffee cart on Delancey. We walk back into the building together, and she asks how I'm doing, real question. The kind she asks when she's already guessed the answer. I say something vague about feeling like my budget isn't quite adding up lately. She says, what's missing? Not, that's strange. Not, maybe it's a mistake. Just, what's missing? I tell her I'm not sure yet. She nods. Let me know when you are. That's all she says. But something in how she said it, let me know when you are, settled into me and stayed there. Month 47. His company held an annual awards dinner at a hotel downtown. Partners and spouses were invited. I wore the navy dress I'd bought 2 years earlier for my cousin's wedding. I had my hair done, the first time in almost 8 months. We were seated with 3 other couples, all from Scott's regional team. The conversation was easy the way it always was when Scott was at the center of it. He was good in rooms. I had always known that. At some point, the topic turned to the house hunting one of the couples, Brenda and Mike, had been doing. They were looking at lake properties 40 minutes north. Scott laughed. He said, we looked at that area too a couple years back. Couldn't make the numbers work. He shook his head, a small wince. Maybe someday. Brenda smiled at me sympathetically. It's so hard right now. The prices, I smiled back. I said nothing. But I had never looked at lake properties with Scott, not once. We had talked about it, briefly 2 summers ago, and he had dropped it within a week, saying the timing wasn't right. I hadn't pushed. I had assumed we'd come back to it when the budget improved. I sat at that table, and I looked at my husband laughing with Mike about real estate, and I thought, whose life is he describing? Not mine, not ours, something else. Something he was rehearsing for reasons I didn't yet understand. I kept smiling. I kept my wine glass in my hand. I did not let anything cross my face. In the bathroom between the main course and dessert, I stood at the sink and ran cold water over my wrists, a habit from a childhood summer job in a hot kitchen, and looked at my reflection. Calm face, steady eyes. I thought, I am watching something I don't have a name for yet. I wrote it down in the yellow notebook the next morning. Lake House. His story, not mine. Why? Month 51. Scott gets a quarterly bonus at work. He mentions it at dinner. $11,200, better than he expected. He slides his phone across the table to show me the email from his manager. Great news, I say, and I mean it. We've been talking about replacing the kitchen faucet and repainting the guest room. Those projects never happened. I waited 2 weeks and then, quietly, I checked our joint accounts and our linked investment account. Nothing. No deposit. No transfer. No trace of $11,200. The faucet dripped on. I went back to my notebook. I started doing math. This is when it got very quiet inside me. I went back 51 months. I pulled the numbers I could verify. Our joint savings deposits, his stated bonuses, the home improvements we talked about but never done, the vacations we talked about, and chosen the cheaper version of. I looked at what I knew his income was and what appeared in our shared accounts. The gap was not small. Even conservatively, even giving him the benefit of every doubt, every probably a cash purchase, every maybe I misheard the amount, the number was somewhere between $174,000 and $220,000 over 4 years that I could account for. Money that had come in and never appeared in any account I could see. I sat in my car in the parking garage, the one my window had faced for years, and I did not cry, I did not react. I sat there for a long time while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and the smell of motor oil and concrete surrounded me. I was doing the math. I was not finished yet. The next morning I rode the elevator up with Margot. She glanced at me and said, "You figured it out." Not a question. I said, "Part of it," she said. "You've been calling it a budget gap. I'd call it something else." "What would you call it?" She pressed the button for 8. Theft. The doors opened. She walked off without looking back. I rode up to 4 and sat down at my desk and began the title search I'd been assigned that morning and did not look up until noon. But somewhere behind my eyes, something has shifted into place. She named it. And once something has a name, you can't unname it. Over the next 3 months, I stopped waiting for things not to add up. I started looking for the pattern actively. I requested copies of our joint tax returns for years 3 through 6 of our marriage. I was entitled to them. My name was on them. I pulled his W-2 information. I pulled the mortgage statements. I cross-referenced everything against the deposits in our joint checking. By month 59, I had a number $214,400, give or take. Over 6 years, missing. I was almost calm when I landed on it, almost. I remember the exact moment, late on a Thursday night, sitting at the kitchen table in the dark with just the screen of my laptop open, and the refrigerator humming and Scott asleep down the hall. I looked at the number, I let it sit. I closed the laptop, I went and got a glass of water, then I went to bed. I lay there listening to him breathe, and I thought, you have been doing this for 6 years. And then I thought, I have 59 months of notes in a yellow notebook. And then I thought, let me think about what comes next. Quick pause here. If you've ever been the person who kept everything running while everyone else took credit, you know exactly what this feels like. If that's you, hit subscribe. I share stories like this every week. Now back to where things were about to fall apart. I want to be careful about how I describe this part because the word breaking point suggests something explosive. What actually happened was quieter than that. It was more like a door closing. Not slamming. Just the soft click of a latch. It was month 60, a Tuesday in February. Scott was at a work dinner. I had gotten home at 6:15, made pasta, eaten alone at the table while reading a deed survey I brought home. I washed the pot. I folded the dish towel over the oven handle. And then I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and sat there for a long time. I had the yellow notebook beside me. I opened it to the first page. I had 61 entries. I read them all, start to finish. The car repair that never appeared, the cell plan, the basketball suite. The bonus that vanished. The summer he said he wanted to look at lake houses and then dropped it without explanation. The December he'd been very stressed at work, and I'd been careful and accommodating for 3 months and had never been told what the stress actually was. Entry after entry, line after line. Dates and numbers and questions with no answers. When I reached the last entry, the $11,200 bonus, I closed the notebook. I sat there. And I made a decision. Not an angry decision, not a sad one, a clear one. The way you decide something when you finally stopped arguing with yourself. I opened a new tab on my laptop. I searched the name Talbot Savings Group. I found their website. I found a phone number. I did not call it that night. It was after 9 p.m., but I wrote it on a sticky note and put it inside the cover of the yellow notebook. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop. I named it Evidence, not Documents, not Finances, Evidence. I started building the file. Over the next 11 days, I assembled everything I had into that folder. Scans of the joint tax returns. Screenshots of our joint account history going back 6 years, pulled from the bank's online portal. Photographs I'd taken of the W-2 as I'd requested. A typed summary of every entry in the yellow notebook, organized by year, with dates and dollar amounts. A running calculation sheet with low estimate and high estimate columns. I printed none of it yet. I kept it digital. I kept it backed up to a cloud storage account I created with an email address Scott did not know about. I was methodical. I worked like I worked at Holcomb and Price, carefully step by step, tracking the chain. In title work, you build a record of ownership that shows exactly where a property has been and how each transfer happened. That's what I was doing. Except this wasn't a property. This was my marriage. And what I was documenting was exactly where the money had gone, one piece at a time, and how each transfer had been hidden. One evening during those 11 days, Scott came home while I was at the kitchen table with a laptop. He asked what I was working on. I said, case file from the office. The Kessler property, the chain goes back to 1968, and there's a missing executor. He looked at the screen for exactly half a second, nodded, went to the refrigerator. He saw a laptop screen. He did not see what was on it. I almost smiled. On the 11th evening, I made a call, not to a lawyer, not yet. I called Margot. It was 8:30 p.m., she answered on the second ring. I said, I need to show you something. Not in the building. There was a short pause. She said, Saturday, noon, the coffee shop on Merchant, not the one near work, the other one. Yes. Bring the numbers. She hung up. I went back to my laptop and opened the evidence folder and began preparing what I would show her. The refrigerator hummed. Down the hall, Scott was watching something with the television turned low. Outside, someone was putting out recycling. The sounds of an ordinary Tuesday night. I made 2 more entries in a yellow notebook. Then I closed it and put it in my tote bag. The coffee shop on Merchant Street smelled like cardamom and old wood. Margot was already there when I arrived. 11:58, at a corner table facing the door. She had an espresso. She had not ordered for me, which I appreciated. She let me settle. I ordered my medium drip. I sat down across from her. I put the manila folder on the table between us. She did not touch it immediately. She said, Tell me what you have. I told her. I walked her through it in order. The yellow notebook and what it contained, the tax returns, the account history, the running calculation, the Talbot Savings Group phone number on a sticky note. I told her about the disappearing bonus, the basketball suite, the repair charges that had no corresponding transaction. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she picked up the folder and opened it. She put on her reading glasses, the ones on the beaded chain. She read slowly. She turned pages carefully. She did not make a sound. After 11 minutes, I was watching the clock on the wall. She set the folder down. She said, Has anything come from Talbot directly to your home? I said I didn't know. I'd been watching the mail more carefully for the past few months, but I'd never seen anything. She said, That's because account statements for a separate account wouldn't come to your address if you opened it with a different mailing address. I hadn't considered that. She continued, But here's what you do have. She pointed to the account history pages. This is a 6-year pattern of consistent non-random shortfalls in deposits relative to documented income. This is not carelessness. The pattern is too consistent, I said. I know, she said. You know what this is? I said. Yes. She looked at me. Say it. I said. It's fraud, against me. Against our joint finances. She nodded once. Then she said, you need a forensic accountant. And you need a family law attorney who handles financial misconduct cases specifically. Not a general divorce lawyer. She reached into her handbag and put 2 business cards on the table. One was a forensic accounting firm, Leland and Associates, and the other was a woman named Catherine Broad at a family law practice. The card said, complex asset and financial misconduct cases. What Scott didn't know was that Margot had spent 31 years as a paralegal in legal offices and had, in that time, seen this exact pattern 11 times, not guessing. 11 documented cases. She knew what she was looking at before I'd finished the first page. What he didn't know was that, when I left that coffee shop, I had 2 phone numbers, a validated evidence folder, and a plan. He had no idea. He was, at that moment, probably watching college football in our living room. I called Catherine Broad that Monday. Her assistant scheduled a consultation for Thursday of the same week. Catherine was in her mid-50s, practical suit, short practical hair, handshake like Margot's. She met me in a conference room that smelled like carpet cleaner and window cleaner and a faint trace of someone's lunch. She read through my folder in 20 minutes. She asked me 17 questions. I counted. Out of habit. She asked them without inflection. She was not warm and she was not cold. She was exact. At the end she said, do you have any access to information about a Talbert savings account? I said, not yet. She said, does your husband know you're here? I said, no. She said, keep it that way. Here's what we're going to do. She told me that in our state, marital assets, including assets accumulated in a spouse's separate name during the marriage, are subject to equitable distribution in a divorce. She told me that if a forensic accountant could document the pattern I'd identified, we could file for a formal accounting in the proceedings. She told me that Talbert, as an FDIC-insured institution, would be subject to a court-ordered disclosure. She paused. Then she said, you've already done most of the hard work. This folder is, she tapped it, genuinely thorough. I told her I was a title examiner. She said, it shows. I went home that evening and made dinner as usual. Scott came home at 6:40. I set a plate in front of him. We talked about something, his week, I think, a coworker situation, and I listened and responded, and then I went to do the dishes and he went to the living room. I stood at the sink and looked at the window over it, which faced the side wall of our neighbor Doris's building. Doris had lived across the hall from us for 4 of the 6 years we'd been in this apartment. She was retired, quiet, the kind of neighbor who returned packages and did not ask questions and baked lemon cake at Christmas. We nodded. We exchanged pleasantries. We were not close. But I remember noticing, that evening, that her kitchen light was on. Her silhouette moved past the window. And I thought, someone in this building is just living her life, having no idea what is happening in mine. I dried my hands on the dish towel. I went to the bedroom. I opened my laptop. I opened the evidence folder. I added a new subfolder. I named it Talbert. Then I sat back and looked at what I had assembled. 6 years of documentation, 2 professional allies, a legal strategy in motion, and a husband in the other room who had not asked me a single question about how I was doing in 3 weeks. I felt something I can only describe as readiness. Alright, I need to pause here for just a second because this next part, I've never told anyone the full version. If you're still here, thank you. That means something. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And drop a comment. What would you have done? Okay, here's what happened. I want to tell you something about that Saturday morning, the morning of the envelope. I had not planned it for that day. I hadn't planned a day at all, actually. Catherine and I were in the middle of the legal process. The forensic accountant, a quiet, methodical man named Bernard at Leland and Associates, had been working through our financials for 3 weeks. We were building toward a formal filing. The plan was to have everything in order before I said a word to Scott, but the envelope arrived. Mail came on Saturday mornings between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock. Scott had left early, a work errand, he'd said, though work errands on Saturday mornings had stopped surprising me 2 years ago. I was standing in the kitchen in my robe, making coffee, and I heard the mail slot. I retrieved the bundle as I always did. The electric bill, the Bed Bath & Beyond mailer, and the envelope from Talbert Savings Group. He had used our home address after all. Maybe he'd changed it recently. Maybe he'd gotten careless. The statement was addressed to him alone. I looked at it for a long time. Then I opened it. The account had been opened 6 years and 2 months ago, 3 months after our wedding. The opening deposit was $8,200. The current balance was $214,400. There were regular deposits going back years, irregular amounts, ranging from $1,800 to $14,400, averaging out to approximately $2,980 a month. Nothing traceable to a single event. Spread out like someone who had been doing this carefully for a very long time. I photographed every page of the statement with my phone. I forwarded the photos to the private email account. I sent a message to Catherine. The account is confirmed. I have the statement, full documentation attached. Then I put the statement back in the envelope. I placed the envelope in the middle of the kitchen counter, where it had been when I found it. I poured my coffee. I went to get dressed. At 11:15 Scott came home. I heard his key. I heard him set his bag down. I heard him walk toward the kitchen. He always went for coffee when he came home, a habit. And then I heard him stop. I was in the living room. I had a book open in my lap, though I had not read a word of it. I was listening. There was a long silence, maybe 30 seconds. It felt longer. He appeared in the doorway of the living room. He was holding the envelope. His face was doing something I hadn't seen before, a kind of recalibrating, the expression of a man who is running through scenarios very quickly to find the one that costs him the least. He said, "I was going to tell you about this." I looked at him. I said, "Okay." He said, It's complicated." I set it up as a savings backup, in case something happened to the business. "You know how uncertain the market has been." I said, 6 years is a long time to be uncertain." He said, "Thea," I said, "how much is in it?" He paused. He knew I had already looked. I said, $214,400. "I know." He came into the room. He sat down. He was not aggressive. He was not angry. He looked tired, is what he looked. Like a person who has been carrying something for a long time and is almost relieved to put it down. He said, "I was going to use it for us, eventually, for the house, or retirement." I said, "We have talked about retirement savings 6 times in the past 3 years, and you have agreed each time that we can't quite afford to increase our contributions yet." Silence. I said, "We have been paying minimum interest on my student loans for 2 years because you said we needed to maintain liquidity." He said, "Thea, I know how this looks," I said. "I'm not interested in how it looks. I'm interested in where the money came from." He didn't answer that. I said, "I've been working with a forensic accountant for the past 3 weeks. And with a family law attorney for the past 5. I have 6 years of documentation." I watched his face change. I said, "Every shortfall. Every deposit that didn't appear in our joint accounts. Every bonus that I verified from your tax records that never showed up in the household budget. I have it all. I have it organized by year." I paused. I said, "I named the folder evidence." He said nothing. His face had gone the color of old paper. I stood up. I said, "Catherine Broad at Garrison Family Law will be filing a formal accounting petition on Monday morning. You'll be hearing from her office. I'd recommend having someone to talk to by then." He said, "Thea." His voice had changed, gone softer. I recognized the quality of it, the particular tone he'd used in the first years of our marriage when he wanted to make something easier. "We can talk about this. We can work something out." "This doesn't have to," I said. "I've been talking to myself about this for 4 years. I'm done talking." I picked up my tote bag. My keys were already in it. My phone. My wallet. I had put them there before he came home. I walked out of the living room. I walked past him in the doorway. I opened the front door. I heard Doris's door across the hall open a crack. She was putting out a recycling bag, a small Saturday routine. I didn't look at her, but I heard the recycling bag set down. And then nothing, no sound at all from across the hall. She had stopped. I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. My hands were shaking, not from fear. They weren't shaking from fear. I want to be exact about that. It was adrenaline, the physical aftermath of holding yourself completely still for 4 years, and then finally letting the thing you were holding go. I sat in my car on the street for 18 minutes. I did not drive. I looked at my hands until they steadied. The street was quiet in that particular Saturday morning way, unhurried, ordinary, no idea what had just happened in apartment 4C. My phone started ringing at minute 12. "Scott." I watched it ring. I did not answer. At minute 18 I started the car. I drove to the coffee shop on Merchant Street. I ordered a medium drip. I sat in the corner table where Margot and I had sat, and I held the cup in both hands, and I let the warmth move through my palms. Then I called Catherine. "It's done," I said. she said. How are you? I thought about it. Clear, I said. I feel clear, she said. Good, Monday morning we file. I drank my coffee. Outside, the Merchant Street traffic moved by. Someone had propped a bookshop door open and a smell of old paper and dust drifted out into the cold. I sat there for a long time. No one asked me anything. No one needed anything from me. I ordered a second cup. The first time I had done that in years. Monday morning, Catherine filed. The forensic accounting report confirmed what I had calculated and then went further. Bernard at Leland and Associates documented $214,400 in diverted marital assets across a period of 73 months. The Talbert account, once subject to court-ordered disclosure, showed 89 individual deposits. Not round numbers, never round numbers. $1,840 here, $4,220 there. $9,140 around the time of year 3 bonuses. Careful, deliberate. Disguised as nothing specific because there was nothing specific to trace it to. The judge ordered full disclosure within 14 days. Scott retained a lawyer. His lawyer was good. None of it mattered. In a divorce proceeding in our state, marital assets accumulated during the marriage, regardless of whose name they're in, are subject to equitable distribution. $214,400 is a marital asset. His lawyer argued it was a personal savings vehicle, a precaution, not concealment. Catherine presented the timeline. Opened 3 months after the wedding. Deposits beginning immediately. Never disclosed on any tax return or financial affidavit. The court was not sympathetic. The settlement took 4 months to finalize. I received $161,800 from the Talbert account, after legal fees, accounting fees, and certain negotiated adjustments. I received the apartment, subject to my assuming the remaining mortgage, which was manageable on my income. I received half of our joint investments, which were modest but real. Scott's professional consequences were his own to manage. I won't detail them here except to say that a forensic accounting finding of this nature, entered into a public court record, has a way of following a person. He did not apologize, not in any real way. He sent a text 3 weeks after the settlement was finalized. It said, I hope you're doing okay. I'm sorry this happened. I read it once. I did not respond. This happened is not an apology. It is the grammar of a person who cannot bring themselves to name what they did. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Doris knocked on my door. She was holding a small container of lemon cake, her Christmas cake, 6 months early. She said, I heard the door that morning. I saw you leave. She paused. She said, I read the mail sometimes, on the table in the lobby. I saw that envelope a few times before you did. She looked at me. She said, I didn't know what it meant. I do now. I invited her in for tea. We sat at the kitchen table, my apartment, my name on the lease now, and we had tea and lemon cake and talked about nothing in particular. It was the first easy afternoon I'd had in longer than I could account for. A few weeks later, Margot and I met for coffee at the Merchant Street place. She was already there. She had ordered for both of us this time. She sat across from me and said, It went the way it should. I said, It did. She said, You did the work. I said, You gave it a name. She picked up her espresso. Names matter. We sat there a while. The cardamom smell. The old wood. Outside, a Saturday moving at its own pace, not caring about anyone's timeline. A month later, I moved. Not far, still the same city, same commute, but a different building. A 5th-floor apartment with a window that faced east, not a parking garage. Not a side wall, east. In the mornings, the light came in at an angle across the kitchen table and made the wood glow. I sat there with my coffee, medium drip, still no sugar, and watched the light move, and I thought, this is what I was saving for. I hadn't known I was saving for this, specifically. But here I was. I've been asked what I learned from this. The honest answer is, I learned that the things I was most careful about were not the things I should have been careful about. I spent 6 years tracking the wrong numbers. I watched the joint accounts. I watched the mortgage. I watched the budget spreadsheet. I built that spreadsheet with the care of someone who believed that if the visible numbers added up, everything was fine. I was so attentive to what was in front of me that I didn't see for too long how much effort had gone into keeping something out of my sight. What I know now is that financial transparency is not a gesture of trust, it's the minimum foundation of an equal partnership. That's not a radical idea. But it's easy to let it get blurry when you love someone, or when you used to love someone. Or when someone used to leave coffee on your nightstand on Saturday mornings and you associate their presence with safety. Love can make you generous with blind spots. That generosity is not a flaw, but it has a limit. And you are allowed to find the limit. What I know about Scott is that he was capable of warmth and also capable of this. Both of those things are true. I no longer need to resolve it. Some people contain contradictions that cannot be explained, only documented. Margot, who is still on the 8th floor, still precise, still wearing the reading glasses on the beaded chain, told me something once that I have kept. She said, the moment you stopped explaining it away is the moment you became the most powerful person in the room. She wasn't talking about the confrontation. She was talking about that Thursday night at the kitchen table, with the laptop, and the number $214,400, and the refrigerator humming, and the decision that was not angry, just clear. My life now is quieter and more mine than it has ever been. I still take the same route to work. I still get the medium drip from the cart on Delancey. I still have 3 blazers, though I finally fixed the lining on the left sleeve of the gray one. But the kitchen table faces east now. And the money I save stays where I put it, and no one moves it without my knowing. Here's what I want to say to anyone who is watching and does the math and doesn't like the answer. The math doesn't lie. The story you've been told might, the math doesn't. Trust the math. Write it down. Give it a name. That's Thea's story, or maybe in some way it's yours too. If you've ever been the one holding everything together while everyone else let go, I see you. Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if this meant something to you, subscribe. There are more stories in the description. Women who decided enough was enough and did something about it. I'll see you in the next one.